welcome to a very special edition of Leading Edge Interviews. I am your host, Supa Dave. Now, as you know, this series is normally dedicated to chatting with the greats of the prog world, getting to know them and their work a little bit better. But this time around, we're going to be doing something a little different. This time around is going to be all about Alex, Geddy, and Neil. Rush, of course. So, with 2024 being the 50th anniversary year of the release of the band's self-titled debut, as well as Neil Peart joining the band as the new drummer and the one that would change the direction of their career, I'm going to be doing a year-long celebration of them and their amazing body of work. As part of that, what I'm going to be doing is finding celebrities to talk to, celebrity fans of the band to talk about how they came to discover Rush, what the band has meant to them over the years, and, generally do what Rush fans do. Geek out over the holy trinity of hard prog rock. It's what we do. Now, if you've lived in the Philadelphia area for any period of time at all, especially as long as I have, you are going to be almost certainly familiar with the region's #1 rated morning show on the radio, Preston and Steve on WMMR. So these guys have been doing it for decades now, and they've done so much for the community. They have earned so many professional accolades and awards, not the least of which was their induction into the Radio Hall of Fame in 2021. These guys are a big deal. They are also the reason that whenever I hear my name, I also hear this. Dave! Yeah, they have pretty well ruined like about 67% of the names in the English language for me, but I love them for it. Always worth it. Anyway, the most important thing of note here, though, is that the Preston component of the show, Preston Elliott, is a huge Rush fan, as well as a drummer. A pretty accomplished drummer, too, and I will say. He has played with the likes of Mike Portnoy, who himself you may have heard of on this channel once in a while. It's possible. Anyway, I was extremely happy to get to sit down to talk with him and just gab for a while about Rush and our shared love of the band. It was a very fun conversation. And it's just two Rush fans talking about Rush. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Preston Elliott of Preston and Steve on WMMR about Rush.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, sir. I appreciate your time. And this is something to get started in my year-long celebration of all things Rush. As they creep up on their 50th anniversary since their debut, at least. Obviously, they've been a band much longer than that, but the band as we know them became Rush on July 29th when Neil joined the band, really. Right. So, it's basically here to geek out a little bit, but I love talking Rush, and I certainly love talking Rush with somebody that I know is a huge, huge Rush fan. If I'm not mistaken, they are second only to the Beatles for you.
Correct.
So, starting off the basics, how did you first get exposed to Rush? Where did you come into contact with them?
So I remember I have a vague memory of the first time hearing Rush on the radio, and it was probably Spirit of Radio. And so it was right before Moving Pictures came out, and I remember I was in my driveway and it's outside and it was night, and the song came on the radio, and it just kind of caught my ear. And at the time I was I was in junior high. We used to call it junior high, not middle school. And I was probably in 7th grade, something like that, 6th, 7th grade. And just something about the sound of it was really, really cool. And it caught my attention. And then I wasn't aware of the band until later that year, 7th grade. I remember that somebody had played Tom Sawyer for me, and it was still, it had a cool sound to it, but I hadn't clicked with the band yet. When I clicked was the first time a friend of mine played 2112 for me. And I think I probably have that in common with a lot of people of a certain age that weren't with Rush on the way up, growing up with them, and maybe they stumbled upon that album years and years after it had already been out. And I remember the friend of mine telling me, hey man, this is a song about a guy in a different planet, in a different world, in a futuristic society that finds his guitar and music is illegal and blah, blah, blah. And he laid out the story for me. I'm like, that sounds trippy. That sounds really cool. And then I think I'd seen the album. I saw the naked guy on the cover of the album, and I thought it was kind of funny. And so he started telling me the story. And then he puts the album on, and I'm like, it opens up with, the swirling synth and all this stuff. And immediately I was, visuals were popping up in my head and is creating this image in my mind, which blows me away. And then the first thing I fixate in is the percussion, the drums, and Neil, and that unbelievable speed and ingenuity, and just the complexity of what he was playing and all this stuff. And I was like, man, a switch was thrown. It was like immediately I was blown away, captivated by this music. I was not overly familiar with conceptual music either. I was not aware of, I was a huge Beatles fan, but I had never really taken Sgt. Pepper's as a conceptual piece because I was still pretty young and I didn't understand the way the music threaded together. I did like how the songs bled into each other, A Day in the Life at the end of the album, it kind of flows into that song. The same thing with, A Little Help from My Friends from Sgt. Pepper's, and A Little Help from My Friends into Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So I was aware of that, but I didn't know about like a story connecting song to song to song. And that album opened up a world to me. And at that point, then I was like, oh, The Wall from Pink Floyd, that's like that too, and so all these avenues started to open up, and I was just, I took a trip down into progressive music, but Rush in general, I was like, I wanted more. I wanted to know more. I wanted to find out more from the band, and that's what opened it up for me.
Yeah, you say a couple of these things, and one, I should note, we're about the same age. I think you're probably about 9 months ahead of me, so we're usually hitting the same number age, the same year every year. So the touchstones are kind of similar. I realize as we're talking that probably somewhere way, way back there, Spirit of the Radio was something I heard on the radio, basically in the car riding wherever my parents were driving me to. And I do have this memory of hearing it on a particular road. So I was a kid. I was, not that young, but I was young enough. And I remember liking it. I remember not having an idea who it was, just that I dug the song, just that I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And then I think a little bit down the road, I probably heard a little bit dribbed and drabbed here and there, but it, like you, it didn't punch me in the gut immediately. I never had that moment where I don't think I've ever had that moment with any band where the moment I heard them, I went, oh my God, maybe Dream Theater. That might have been about it. And I can think back to, getting a little bit of exposure. My friend Scott next door was usually my source for musical stuff because he had an older brother. I'm an only child. So I had nobody to pass anything down to me. Mm-hmm. The thing that always distinctly comes back to me was one day his brother's driving us to the mall. He's playing whatever he's playing in his Pinto. I'm in the back seat, and as it turns out, it was Exit Stage Left.
Okay.
So you can probably guess where this is going.
Yeah.
At a certain point, a drum solo started and pretty much never ended.
Yep.
And I just remember being completely and utterly gobsmacked at what I was hearing because I'd never heard anything like that at that point in time. Right. I was scared off for a long time. I bought a lot of the albums around that time, Signals and Moving Pictures and Permanent Waves. I can remember there was a little bit, a friend of mine had me influenced a little bit with the Satanic Panic kind of crap. And I remember that put me off of buying 2112 for a while because I got a little freaked out about the Red Star.
Yep. I remember all that. Absolutely. That stuff weirded me out a bit too because I was a kid.
Yeah. And then at some point I remember reading their lyrics. I'm going, why would these guys possibly be doing that? Get over yourself, Dave. But the drumming, I'm with you. I think at some point in time, it was the amazing level of musicianship and especially Neil that pulled me in. You're a drummer. I'm a dude who played drums in school, but I could recognize the talent there, but I could never come close to achieving it. So that's what I thought was kind of funny. It's kind of funny how we have some similar moments throughout all of that.
I'm sure we have that in common with a whole lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy I came in that sweet spot right there because I never struggled with the switch to the more synth sounds of the 80s versus the 70s. But I don't know. How did you weather that? Was that something that threw you off and you hated like some bands did?
Maybe not as much. Not until after Rolled Bones and you started getting into, Hold Your Fire, and they kind of started to lose me, and I kind of lose track of the progression once you get to Test for Echo and Vapor Trails and so on. I kind of started to phase out of that, and I know that that wasn't super heavy synth, but my first new album as a fan for Rush was Signals. So when that came along, in fact, I still have, it was my first real rock concert, and this was the program.
Ooh,
from that.
Nice.
I have it in here in this little, case, but this is the program I actually bought at that concert.
Wow.
So I hung on to that. And so when Signals came out, I was a drummer. I was obviously taking all these band classes at school. So all the other drummers were big Rush fans too. And so we were just, talking about Rush and Neil and all the parts. So when that album came out, which I want to say, what year was that? 1984? Somewhere around
82,
there?
actually, I think.
82. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So when that came out, that was my first time to grab brand new music from Rush and sit down and absorb it and take it in. And I wasn't put off by the heavy synths, because there was already some of it leading into that with Moving Pictures, and obviously there was some in Permanent Waves as well. But songs like Chemistry that had really big, big padded, theatrical sounding keys didn't turn me off too much, because I just wanted to absorb this brand new music. First time I had brand new music from Rush. And then that segued into Grace Under Pressure, which got even more synthy. But by that time I was all in, dying Rush fan. Still a young guy, and I wanted to be all about it. So it didn't throw me off. And then actually Power Windows is one of my favorite records from them. That's very, very heavy synth with stuff like, Middletown Dreams and Mystic Rhythms and things like that. But but I did miss Geddy's bass, and as much as he was doing, he was still playing it, but not as much. And I did miss a little bit more of ripping guitar solos from Al, a more clear sound from that, as opposed to real big kind of watery reverbs and choruses that he was using effect wise. So it turned me off just a smidge, but I was still taken in by the odd time signatures, the complexity of the drum parts. When Neil started playing around with the electronics on Grace Under Pressure, I started to get a little confused as a drummer, because, leading up to that, you knew exactly, okay, he's hitting his concert toms, he's hitting his these top floor toms, snare drum, and I could kind of play to them or try to figure out the parts. Once all those electronics came in, I'm like, as a drummer, I don't know what to do. I don't know what he's hitting. He's hitting these different pads, and they're really, esoteric sounds, and I don't know what to make of them. So I got mildly turned off by that stuff, but not enough to where I was like writing off the band or anything like that. And some people did. Some people kind of phased out. I think even, in Exit Stage Left, Beyond the Lighted Stage, the documentary, even like Portnoy was saying, that's kind of when I checked out, and he was a diehard guy, obviously.
Right.
But I weathered through it. There were some songs I would skip over, but for the most part, I didn't hate it too much.
Yeah. For me, like I said, I Signals is kind of where it came in, but it wasn't the first new, like that was the first new release for you. For me, it was Grace Under Pressure.
Okay.
And so kind of between those two, and I think at that point, in 1984, we are smack into the synth era of the 80s. So it's kind of almost expected.
Yeah.
Yes, it come out with 90125 and things like that. What I think is funny, and you talked about as well, you went down the progressive rabbit hole. And I think back, I don't know how long it took me to fully grasp progressive rock as a genre. Like I recognized, high levels of virtuosity and long form compositions and, unusual things. Like I remember being a fifth grader and we were all listening to The Wall, oddly enough, because again, dude had an older brother, so we got into things that we might have not otherwise gotten. And being amazed at this album that just flowed from song to song.
Yeah.
And giggling like a bunch of 12-year-olds would giggle every time they sang, "Mother, do you think they'll try to break my balls?"
Yeah.
So it was long years afterward before I really grasped what this whole progressive rock thing, and that Rush was one of them. It was all just music to me.
Okay.
But the fact that they were doing what they were doing at the time seemed in many ways natural. They were moving in a direction that a lot of other bands were doing. And I wasn't hung up on, I just want to hear what they sounded like in the 70s. And I'm glad they evolved. But at the same time, I'm kind of with you. As much as I love Power Windows, at the same time, I always remember thinking, ooh, that feels like the Neil and Geddy show. I hear a lot of synths, I hear a lot of bass, I hear a lot of drums, but Alex got kind of buried in the mix a little bit. They lost the balance that I thought they had in Grace Under Pressure. And I felt they got back a little bit with Hold Your Fire, although Hold Your Fire wasn't heavy guitars, but the guitars seemed to come back a bit.
Yeah, I was the same way. I was like, where's the ripping guitar solos? You know, I mean, that's what one of the things I loved. You know, you go into something like Livia Strangiato and you're just like, you know, making the face and just jamming. And that kind of went away for a while. But you know, at that time, and we know what was going on musically elsewhere, they were heavily influenced by bands like The Police and, you know, and so Alex started taking on that more rhythmic role because he really liked what Andy Summers was doing over at The Police. And so they were taking what they liked, and they weren't stealing, but they were influenced by other things. And you're right. It was cool to see them progress. They could have easily just stayed down that path and gone where their bread was buttered, but they wanted to take a chance, and they played what felt good to them. And that's what's been great, is the core of the band has always been being true to what they really like and what they want to create as artists. And I always appreciated that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that I always gravitate to with a lot of artists, them especially, was that idea that they weren't there to please the masses.
Yeah.
They were cognizant of their fans and certainly wanting to be respectful of them, but at the same time, making the music the way they were inspired to make it and being true to themselves.
Yeah.
Regardless of anything else. And fortunately, they learned that lesson early in their career when, you know, they pushed through with 2112 and kind of did a clap back to the record company, who seemingly left them alone forevermore after that.
Yeah.
Which was nice.
I have a question for you. Did you ever try to, not realizing that it just wasn't going to work, try to turn girls onto Rush?
I tried to turn girls onto a lot of music back then, and a lot of people, it rarely ever worked.
I remember clearly playing it for a couple of girls here and there, and I'm like, you know, trying to explain to them, you know, how this complex this music and how intense this is and the message that they're sending, and it just felt, you know, and I was just like, you know, you just don't understand. It's, you know, it's just really intellectual, and it just, I didn't know the girls at the time didn't dig Rush. I have met plenty of female Rush fans. Bizarrely enough, you know, who, like, she's not a diehard fan, but she likes Rush, is Kathy Romano. Actually,
really
likes Rush. Yeah.
All the years I've been listening to you guys, and I have not picked up on this. How is that a possibility? Has she kept that a closely guarded secret? Is she trying to...
Every now and then, it just doesn't come up that often. She likes the hits, you know.
That's
she likes the Spirit of Radio and Free Will and Tom Sawyer and not Limelight and those things. So that's cool.
That's amazing. Oh, that's very cool. Kathy has gained points in my estimation at this moment. But yeah, girls, no, it wasn't a thing. And I was always seemingly into the more esoteric music as it was. And that just seems to have been my lot in life, that I am never heavily pop leaning. I probably was more back then, just because I didn't know as much, and it was harder to dig down the rabbit holes that I go down these days.
Right.
So, you know, I was largely left with what was on the radio and what somebody may have handed to me. But that brings up a funny story and kind of a thing I was curious about your experience as well. The idea that I remember taking a lot of crap for being a Rush fan back in the day, back in the 80s, it seemed like. I had friends that liked them and all that, but I also had, it seemed, more people that didn't know them. When they heard them, they didn't like them. The classic rock heads always looked down their nose at them because in their mind they weren't as good as The Who or Zeppelin or something like that. And I can remember at one point in time there was a girl I was kind of into, and I got, there was a trip with her and her friends to go to Pulsations. I know you weren't around at that time, but I think you recall them. I think you guys have talked about them before.
Yeah, I know right where it was, out of media.
Yeah. So I picked up her and her punky gothy friends. We're all heading to Pulsations. Now, what nobody bothered to make mention to me ahead of time was no jeans were allowed. So the point where I picked them up was too far to go home, get changed, come back. We had to improvise. One of the girls had a shirt long enough that she could get away with probably just that. And so I ended up in Pulsations in stirrup pants, of all things.
Okay, all right.
Stirrup pants, yes. And of course, while I'm there, the one person from high school I bump into is the guy who would basically be my nemesis, my Newman. The guy who I'm sure would publicize, hey, Dave was in stirrup pants at Pulsations to the entire school. Right. I think he only maybe didn't because I think it was summertime. Now, as I'm there, what I'm wearing up here is I've got, one kind of flannel shirt over a Rush t-shirt. At one point in time, one of these punky girls, I end up kind of dancing with her a bit and all that. And all of a sudden she looks at my shirt and she goes, what the hell are you wearing? I'm like, oh, it's my Rush t-shirt. And she goes, Rush. Lost all interest in me.
Yeah.
And the way we wrapped that fun night up was me driving home 10 punkers who hadn't bothered to arrange transportation for themselves, 10 of them in my 1975 Mustang.
Nice.
Yes. Good times.
Yeah, I got lucky. I had a lot of my friends were Rush fans. I had a lot of drummer friends, a lot of stoner friends. I was in a stoner crew, back in the 80s, and we were all, it was Van Halen and Rush, man. Van Halen, Rush, Pink Floyd, yes, all that stuff. We were pretty diehard at that point. So I got lucky. I didn't have to convince too many people, other than the handful of girls I made the mistake of trying to move around.
Yeah. Oh, that's where you were lucky. I always felt like I took so much crap, but I was.
Oh.
I look back, and about the time the 2000s came along, I could look back and say, let's see. D&D is now cool. Doctor Who's had a revival, and that's a big hit, and everybody knows it. Yeah. Rush is getting movies made. I Love You, Man. Yeah. And get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by almost the end of that decade. And all that stuff. And I look back and went, the world finally caught up with me.
It came around. We were ahead of our time. Yep.
And it's amazing now because the reverence so deservedly that I see them receiving. And in particular, I don't know how often you get caught in YouTube rabbit holes, but there's this phenomenon of the reaction video where people watch a video and just react to it. It's exactly what it sounds like. And it seems to be the most prominent artist that is getting all the attention is now Rush.
Yeah, a lot of them are like, a classical percussionist listens to Rush for the first time, or they'll take people that would be out of the pool of the fan base, but have some musical legitimacy to them, or the people that are into hip hop or whatever it may be, some kind of fish out of water scenario. And yeah, those are fun. And you're right. There's a lot of them that focus around Rush.
Yeah. It's been amazing to me. It's actually what kind of pulled me into some of that stuff, because I just saw one come up one day and I saw the two guys doing it and I went, I wonder what they're going to think of this. And they went gaga for it. They loved it. And I went, and I see these over and over, people loving them. Going, holy smokes, the world has so changed.
Yeah.
And I was a teenager.
Too, in like documentaries, like in Beyond the Lighted Stage, you had, alt rock kings, Billy Corgan, Trent Reznor, these people that were going the other way musically, going very, in a whole different direction, opening up a different world of rock, saying that this band was huge influence. When you think about it, Rush was kind of like that in a less cool way, in that they kind of started to head in their own direction. They had influences of bands that took a more experimental and adventurous route like the Who, but they did their own thing with it, and they made it even more technically interesting with odd time signatures and really complex movements and stuff. So yeah, they were definitely groundbreakers in my mind.
Yeah, that was the part I always loved about them, is the fact that they were willing to do things that other people weren't, and it seemed that they took it very seriously, and I was so glad to get to see that documentary and start to see and hear more and more of them as I was able to later in life in interviews and such, and to realize that this band that I had this perspective of being so serious so often was really a bunch of goofs, I think is a word Getty used, a bunch of goofballs.
Yeah. Did you read his biography?
I am just starting it now. I admit I'm slower than I wanted to, but I wanted to finish up my biannual Lord of the Rings reading through before I moved on to another book. So I end up reading very slowly because my time is interspersed, and God knows the minute I start to read, I start to fall asleep. But I just started. I got to see him, and I got to see his tour for the book, which was amazing, because for me it was, oh, wow, I thought I was never going to see any of these guys in person again.
The book's wonderful. I couldn't stop. I did the audio version of it because I listened to it while I'm in my car, and I just could not wait to get back in and hear more of it. And he's such a intelligent, even-keeled, compassionate, outside of the musicianship, and he just seems to be a good person who just understands a lot about people. And I really, really enjoyed reading that book. I thought it was fantastic. And I've read a couple of Neil's books as well. Ghost Rider was really wonderful, and that came on the tail end of his wife and daughter dying, and his road to recovery and healing. And he's obviously was a very intense guy. And I can't get enough. Another question outside of the books: did you see Getty's our bass players people too series?
No, I've not gotten to that, and it's on my list of things to get.
Yeah, they're short. The episodes are only 30 minutes long. You can knock them out real quick. And I think Getty has a nice future continuing to do that. He seems to be a great host and interviewer, and he's got a talent for it. And I think that they can expand on that a lot more, and I hope they do. It'll depend on how many people watch it and how successful it is, but I really, really, really enjoyed that feature.
Yeah, you've inspired me. I need to make sure I'm doing that tonight. My girlfriend and I get on these binges of shows, so we're kind of clearing things out little by little, and we're behind doing that. So newer stuff has
everybody is. There's so much stuff to watch.
Yeah, there really is. And but yes, I've got to get to that. That was another one. I almost hit the floor. What world am I living in that Geddy Lee now has a TV show? How is this happening? I want to go back and tell 13-year-old me about this stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. Don't worry about it. Yeah,
it's all going to be good. But yeah, I agreed. Watching him talk and listening to him as he was reading excerpts from the book and everything like that, and honestly, just as a whole band, it's one of the things I've always loved about Rush is they're never a band I felt in any way, shape, or form I needed to feel a little embarrassed by or apologetic. There's none of the shenanigans that some other bands have gotten into. There's none of the tawdry crap that goes on. They're like all married to two of them are married to their high school sweethearts.
Yep.
Neil was close to that, and God bless him, he got married again. About the time he passed away, I was in the midst of reading the last of his, I guess, Far and Away books or whatever, which hit simultaneously as I'm reading about him talking about his relationship with his young daughter, and then all of a sudden he's gone. I'm like, crap. All right. Well, this is a little harder to read now.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that was a gut punch. I remember exactly where I was. Like you remember very important moments in your life, and that one, I just couldn't believe it. I was just so blindsided and hurt by that. And I was standing next to my wife, and she just goes, she heard me kind of gasp, and she goes, "What?" I go, "Neil's going." And she knew exactly what I meant. I didn't have to say anything more than that. Yeah, that was terrible.
Oh, yeah. I have not one that has heroes per se. Can't really ever say I did, but if there was one who would meet that definition for me, it would have been him.
Yeah.
These are good guys.
I was hoping to one day have encountered him, but then again, I also wasn't, because I knew his standoffishness and his, he just felt uncomfortable meeting people he didn't know or meeting fans, because it put him in a bizarre position for him personally, the way his psyche was. And I totally get it. I understand that. But I did have little fantasies about encountering him in some place that wasn't music related, and we just happened to start talking, and it would have been cool, but yeah. I have met Alex and Getty a handful of times throughout the years, and they're very, very pleasant and very accommodating and nice guys. But I always wanted to at least have an encounter with Neil. Closest I have is behind me here, or this is the opposite side. This is a guy that worked in photography for the band, and he was on the Time Machine tour.
Oh, wow.
He sent me all this stuff. So those are sticks that Neil used in warm-ups, and in sound check. That is a drum head that he actually signed. This is a photo pass. There's a bunch of pics that are up there. You can't see them because they blended.
Yeah.
This is autographed by all three of them. This is the actual Moving Pictures album that they signed as well. I normally don't take stock in someone else getting autographs for me. I like to get them myself if I'm going to get them, because that means it really counts because you met them.
Right.
But this guy sent this stuff to me. I'm like, oh, I have to display that. I got to put that somewhere. That's fantastic.
But you got cooler stuff on your wall than I do.
Well, working in business, that stuff. But yeah, I've got that, and I've got an autographed tour guide somewhere around here. I think from Roll the Bones, that all three of them signed as well, which was
wow. That is very awesome. Yeah, I'm with you, where there's precedent set for me. That's it. If I meet somebody on that level, I got to be careful.
Yeah,
because I'm really, really good at finding the quickest line between where my foot is and where my mouth is, and just bringing those together.
Yeah.
And
there are things you want to say. There are things that are important to you that you would like to share with them. And chances are they've heard it from other people before. But still, to be able to convey that, how much it means to you. I stuck my foot in my mouth one time when meeting Alex. He was wearing a Trailer Park Boys shirt. Of course, he's been on Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah.
And I walk up and I go, "Excuse me, I'm here to see the Trailer Park Boys." I was just joking, and he's like, "Well, I guess that's me." And like it kind of, and I was like, "Anyway, very nice to meet you. Thank you. I'm such a fan." Blah blah blah. And then I was like, "Oh, you dumbass! You tried to make him laugh. That was stupid."
Yeah. That's kind of the thing I experienced. The script in my head did not flow. He didn't read his lines.
Yeah.
I remember I said it too, and I'm like, all right, I look like an idiot, and I know I'm smarter than this. The only time I've really literally bumped into a celebrity in the wild, so to speak, was actually, believe it or not, Mike Portnoy. Now, granted, he's at almost all the concerts I go to at this point.
Okay.
So it's not unusual, but I know standing outside the Met about a year and a half ago at this point, and one of the guys in line with us goes, "Hey, is that Portnoy over there at the will call window?" And I look over, I'm like, "Yeah, that is." I turn to my girlfriend to say something. She's already halfway to him. Like, I'm like, hold on. And I basically caught up to her and, snapped a picture and all that. And then at that point in time, I know I communicated with Mike, but I don't know if I actually used words. We got a picture together and all that. He was very nice and very gracious. And I know I look back and I go, boy, I hope I said thank you.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I said. It just caught me so completely by surprise. Yeah. The only thing I knew I didn't get into at that moment was hassling him. "Hey, dude, I do this show. You want?"
Right.
I've been trying to track his representation down for ages, and I just I think I'm good now that he's back with the band. But he has been my white whale.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, I'll give you a tip. He doesn't do anything before 3 p.m. anymore. He won't do interviews before 3 p.m. So you're probably good to go. You can probably get him in
Well, we'll see if we can get there someday. Again, I've got a few bucket list folks I'd like to talk to somewhere along the line, but see what happens with it. Getting back to Rush, I'm curious about something, and I actually was curious about your perspective of it. One, as a person who's actually an accomplished drummer, as opposed to someone who held some sticks for a few times. I remember getting into this debate with somebody, and it was a long time debate. Usually, again, the classic heads would look down on it, where Neil, where did he rank among drummers? And for a lot of them, it was sacrilege for anybody to compare him to somebody like Bonham or Keith Moon. Mm-hmm. And I remember getting into a debate with one dude online who insisted that Neil could never possibly be anywhere near as good as Bonham because he was not capable of finding a groove, of just jamming, that Bonham could always find a groove, and Neil was too practiced and too perfectionistic. And I kept thinking, but somebody gets that perfectionistic somehow. they get that good somehow.
Well, here's my issue with trying to put people in a box and find the greatest is there's several different types of great. And Bonham's groove was unbelievable. You know, he had a way to make this flow happen, which is amazing. And I love John Bonham. I think he was one of the greatest drummers of all time, but he's not my favorite. Neil was my favorite because I was more intrigued by odd time signatures. I was intrigued by the way Neil would build on bass rhythms. And by that, I don't mean bass guitar or bass drum, the basic of a rhythm. And he would play with it. He would tinker with it. He would change it as the song evolved. His rhythms would evolve. And of course, he could play at speed. He could play intricate sticking patterns and things like that. And to me personally, I found that more intriguing than what John Bonham was doing. It doesn't make it better than what John did, and it doesn't make what John did better than Neil, I think. If you want to talk about sheer performance ability, you go to the jazz guys. You go to Dave Weckl and Vinnie Colaiuta and these guys that could literally wipe their ass with John Bonham. Yes, I said that just. But they probably thought Bonham was a great fucking drummer too, even though technically they could play circles around, you know? So it's all subjective. It all depends on what you find that touches you as great. And yes, there's technical ability. There are people that can play with lightning fast, unbelievable speed. You know, there's Terry Bozzio, who's in another fucking realm. He's incredible. And he does really strange stuff that's complex, more complex things than Neil did, playing in really crazy time signatures with Zappa and all the other stuff that he did. So I think you add Zeppelin's greatness and what they did to music, Bonham's feel and all that. And I think that speaks a lot to the people that go, John Bonham was the greatest drummer in the world. And I can't agree with that as a statement. I don't think there's a greatest drummer in the world. I mean, Buddy Rich still stands as a guy that did things that drummers today are still analyzing and breaking down and going, wait a minute, what did he do and how did he do that? And he was absolutely incredible. And if I were to say best drummer ever, I'd probably put it on that guy, you know?
Yeah. And he did it in a fucking suit.
He did it in a suit. Yeah, that suit. Although he does in a suit is unreal. And he was, you know, in his late 60s and playing these unbelievable fast single stroke rolls that you can barely hear.
Yeah.
That takes control that just is supernatural almost.
Yeah.
But there are people that can do that. There are other people that can do it. It's just he did it. He did it first. He did it originally. He came up with that stuff. People can copy that. Part of it is what can you come up with on your own. So I have a hard time with comparing Bonham and Neil. You know, it's two different branches of rock music. I just personally found Rush more appealing on a personal level. What they were doing and the journey they were taking you on these songs. You know, so I get that most drummers are going to say John Bonham is my favorite drummer. I totally get that. I understand that. And maybe, people like, Chad Smith, who's, become a really hot commodity lately. When Neil died, he was like, oh my God, Neil was incredible. He's one of my all-time favorite drummers, but he always say, I was always a Bonham guy. So so I like the way he puts that. I was always a Bonham guy. He's not saying Bonham was better than Neil. He's like, I was a Bonham guy. Well, I was a Neil guy, that's kind of how I see it as well. So, it just all depends on how you want to package it and put a label on it, which I don't really care for, but, there are guys that are better than others. I mean, but there are some guys who do things like, if we're going to geek out on drummers for a while, this drummer named Manicace, who played with, Peter Gabriel on So as drummer, you go and you listen and to you, you may not have taken the time to stop and just listen to what was going on drum wise, because lyrically and melodically, the music is beautiful, but the things that he was doing in the background were so subtle and so tricky and unique and very sneaky in their complexity. As a drummer, I'm going, this is unreal what this guy is doing, but not everybody hears that. And it all depends on who you are and what your ears are like and what your personal preference is.
I'm usually pretty good at picking out a lot of subtleties, which is probably one of the reasons why I like prog rock, is it gives enough going on all at once that my brain is entertained and focused. There's a little bit of that ADHD to me, so I'm trying to listen to all of it at once, and the more that's there. But you pushed me to maybe have to go back and listen to the things now. I'm wondering, what did I miss? What did I miss on So? Because I know that album so well.
And hear these little subtle, little bitty things that are being done. They're really, really hard to play. They're very, very, and they're really even more hard to come up with on your own. That's the thing that impresses me. Like, oh my God, that guy thought to do that. Crazy. Yeah. And, like Steve Smith from Journey, people look at Journey as just this kind of, pop rock band. Some of the stuff he was doing, you're just overwhelmed already by Steve Perry's vocal capability, the melodic, awesomeness of those songs and the catchiness of them, and Neil Sean's unbelievable guitar playing. Well, in the background, Steve Smith was doing some shit that was incredible.
He was sneaky that way, that you didn't realize the massive talent behind the kit until years later, and you suddenly go, wait a minute, same dude.
Well, I was talking to Mike Portnoy, of all people. The time that he came by and I played with him in the studio, I was telling him what a fan I was of Steve Smith. And I said, you know what, dude, I can't believe that he held back as much as he did with Journey, because he went on into the jazz world and ended up doing, showing what he could really do. But Mike goes, dude, it was Journey. He's like, he played what the music called for. This is what the music calls for. And that's what some really great musicians will do. They can play this incredibly complex stuff, but the music doesn't necessarily call for it, and so they don't, and they add what's necessary.
Yeah,
and that's impressive.
Playing within the constraints of the music of the song, and I'm a big admirer of restraint in many ways. Like, there's a lot you can do with a few notes and a bit of silence and some inflection and things like that here and there, whether it's drums or guitar or whatever. Yeah, and I love that kind of stuff sometimes, because it's not pounding you in the face, and it's getting this emotion across in just this nice, subtle, to use the word again, way, this nice quiet way, and I love that.
It's a feel. And you know what? Bonham did that too. And so did Jeff Porcaro from Toto. There's a whole laundry list of them.
Right. Yeah. It's an amazing thing, but I had to flash back to that conversation, because he was so adamant and so angry that I would even suggest Neil was on a certain level with, and I was kind of like, dude, as long as, like, for that moment, my head does, like, if you tell me that any of the three, Keith Moon, John Bonham, Neil Peart, are the best rock drummers in the world, whatever order you want to put them in, I'm like, cool. But really, since then, I've learned a good bit more, and I'm like, you're right. It's beyond even trying to rank them anymore. It's too hard, and really, it's not what to serve.
Tell them to go listen to Steve Gadd, and compare that to John Bonham. Steve was pretty good too. So there's a lot of.
I know that name. Who is
that? Steve Gadd. He was a session guy. He played with Steely Dan, and he played with Paul Simon, and he was a groundbreaker. So 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, that really unique, cool drum. he was
practically
amazing.
was the Noah.
He is amazing. But I mean, there's too many great drummers to say this guy's the best.
Yeah.
I believe, except for maybe Buddy Rich.
Except for maybe Buddy Rich, because they'll all tell you that.
Yeah.
All right. Preston, I really had a great time talking with you tonight. I really appreciate you giving the time, and that's just sitting here and helping me to lead off this celebration of Rush for 2024. It's been a pleasure, man.
Dude, it's my honor. I'll talk about Rush anytime. So thanks for asking me to be here.
Absolutely. So you have a good rest of your night. Take care and rage on, man. If I can steal a line from you.
All right. Okay.
Take care.
All right, let's be honest here. There is no amount of time that is long enough for two Rush fans to talk about the band. There's just so many shared experiences and perspectives and so many aspects of the band to talk about. This easily could have gone on for hours. So I want to send a big thank you out to Preston Elliott for joining me to launch this little Rush love fest of a project, and for just honestly being one of the coolest Rush fans out there. I had a blast, and I hope we get to talk again in the future. Just want to say the best to you, Preston, and the rest of the Preston and Steve Show crew. You guys keep doing all the great things you do every day. It means so much to me and the rest of the city. So, as you like to say, rage on, man. For those watching, thank you very much for your time, for joining along. If you're enjoying the channel, please subscribe and follow along on my adventures in the Progosphere. The social media links are below in the description, and so is the link for my all prog, all the time station, The Expanse, on Live 365. Give it a listen. I think you'll like it. If you want to hunt down my full collection of interviews, they are available wherever you find podcasts. Just search Bleeding Edge Interviews. You find them all there, going back 3 years now almost. Just want to say thanks once again for watching. And remember, never be afraid to deviate from the norm. Keep it proggy. And this is Supa Dave, signing off.